Welcome back to another episode of Inside Moves, West Coast Edition. Today we are in Los Angeles with Tate Frazier, college basketball analyst, the host of One Shining Podcast, Through the Ringer, and the narrator of The World of Five Star. Well, I think this is like a good way to start it. Like, you are making a living talking about sports. You figured out how to do that without the jock nepotism. Like Tom Brady, Tom Brady's pretty good, but he ends up on Fox right after.
Right.
So take me through that timeline. How'd you accomplish that? You've been in a lot of different places and you probably had your sights set on that for a while.
Yeah, it's, I was a kid, small town, North Carolina, at my high school in about ninth grade. I was, came back. I went to private school for middle school, came back to public school in high school, was about, I was a good player, private school, basketball, golf, everything. Coming back, I was like, okay, now's the time to lock in. By about 10th grade, I had realized I'm not going to be a pro athlete. You know what I mean? Yeah. I was like, okay, I didn't make varsity my ninth grade year. That was the telltale sign. And then all I did was watch SportsCenter. All I did was kind of, ideate about who I was going to be at the next level. I love sports, love college sports, kind of just had, there was this show Stump the Schwab.
Oh, yeah.
That was on ESPN. I would try to stump the Schwab every day. I just kind of was like fixated on all these facts in sports and all these teams, all these stories, all these brands. And, I was like, how do I get in that world, not as an athlete? And, being like the SportsCenter anchor was kind of like the way in, and Stuart Scott was like my hero. So by about 10th grade, I'd figured that out. Now I didn't know how to get there per se, but like by 10th grade, I kind of had an idea. And, as I was around people in my life, they're just like, this guy, just all he does is talk about sports. You know what I mean? Like so people like that sports guy, and then I actually ended up finding Bill Simmons, later in my life, and that was his moniker, the sports guy. But I didn't even really know about that at the time. It was just one of those things where it was my way to relate to older people, younger people, anybody. And growing up in the triangle, right? You got Carolina, Duke, NC State, Wake Forest, right? So my aunt, uncle went to Wake Forest, so they had their vantage point. I had close friends, best friends that were Duke fans. I had their vantage point. My parents went to Carolina, had their vantage point. Had NC State fans all around me. They're everywhere. So there was a lot of sports to be talked about, kind of growing up in that space. And, I love facilitating the conversation. So it's always been good.
You're good at it. Were there what was like the first gig you got? And like, where do you think you really started learning about the business of this, the industry of it, and how to attack it from that perspective?
It's a great question. Luckily, my brother is 4 years older. Shout out to my brother Gil. And he went to Carolina before me. And one of his best friends is a guy by the name of Charlie Hume. And Charlie worked at ESPN and was my brother's age. So like I had seen 4 years before, while I was in high school, someone like Charlie who was working it and then got a job at ESPN. And so I kind of had like a blueprint there in front of me. My brother is a lawyer now, so he did not go down that path. But through Charlie and through my brother seeing like kind of how they did Carolina, I kind of had a way to kind of visualize a path of doing media. I had a friend, Mark Carroll, who was ended up being in the fraternity I joined there, and he was like working for David Glenn, which is a radio show in Raleigh. He's like, we need interns to answer the phone calls, kind of put people on the lines, get a take or whatever, kind of hold them, throw them in sort of thing, and to transcribe all of the interviews. So not the best job, right? Transcribing audio, if you've ever done it. Shout out to you. We did not have the technology of today where you have like, all these different apps where you just throw it in and it translates it. I used to have to do it manually, which is not fun. So my first job was doing that at David Glenn. That was in Raleigh. I was a freshman in college. I did that for about 8 months. During that time, I got the scoop of a lifetime that James Michael McAdoo was on the North Carolina team that was trying to go win the national championship in 2012. So that was my freshman year, second semester. And Kendall Marshall hurt his wrist. And everybody was wondering if he was going to play in the Elite Eight game. Would Stillman White have to start? And I got the scoop that he was not going to play. I had reached out to some people in the industry. I'd met Greg Barnes, Inside Carolina. They kind of pieced it all together, got the story, and Greg, did the reporting of it all. I was that was my first scoop. I'm not a scooper, but I got that scoop. Greg Barnes got that story out. It was a national story. It was a big deal. Kendall Marshall did not play, so it was, luckily vetted. And North Carolina ended up losing that game, which was tough, but it was good for my career. That summer, Inside Carolina had an internship program. They were like, do you want to do this? So I went to Inside Carolina. I was an intern, and I started transcribing audio for them as well. And not the most fun, but going to all the press conferences, kind of listen to all the coaches from around the ACC. You learn a lot, So at that time, I was 18, 19, so I'm just going to like Dabo Swinney's press conference, just listening, transcribing, soaking in everything around me. And, over that, I think 18 months I was at Inside Carolina, I went from like intern to like, they kind of gave me the baseball beat. So I was covering the baseball team, writing stories about the baseball team. Basketball, I would go to the game, started writing, stories. So at that time I wanted to be a writer. So I thought, and, not the best writer. I'm fine as a writer, but like that's not necessarily my passion. If anything, it was a pressure point to have to churn out beat, reports after games and stuff like that. But again, it was one of those things where I was in college, but I was also working, and I knew that working meant more than going to class in my mind. I was like, getting experience in the real world will be good for me. And then it was funny because then I had like a Doogie Howser thing going on because I look, I still, look like I'm, maybe 15 at this point. But back then I looked like I was 12. So I had a lot of people that were just like, who's this kid sitting over here? And I got a lot of, great conversations, great interviews and things like that. And, slowly over time, I had to like knock the fandom out of me because I'm covering the team, which is kind of funny because later in my career, I come back to Bill Simmons and he's like, lead into the fandom. You know what I mean? So this time I'm still like, got to be a journalist. I'm in the press box. We don't cheer. If anything, we're trying to find and poke holes into what the coaches and the players are saying after games, right? That capital J journalistic.
It's a different angle that you're in now.
Right. Now it's like personality based. At the time, I'm just working it like, I'm going to be, working for an SID officer. I don't even know, something like that. So,
for the sake of this podcast, please keep the fandom on.
Yes.
I guess we could just get into this now.
Of course.
I think one of the things we got to unpack here is the Duke Carolina thing, right? And you brought it up with your Inside Carolina.
Inside Carolina, right?
So you were the baseball beat writer,
right?
13 and 14.
I mean, I'm basically like an associate writer for Inside Carolina, but I'm in college at the same time, so I'm covering the baseball team. I think it was 2012, 2013 are the two seasons.
2012, 2013. So were you at? Let's see here, Jack Coombs Field. 2013, I think it was.
This is like the Ken Emanuel Carolina team.
What was the kid's Michael, the shortstop?
Michael Russell.
Michael Russell.
Yeah, Sky Bolt.
Sky Bolt was in the outfield.
Yeah. That was like the team that I like. Sky Bolt, I thought was going to be, superstar. Yeah. Like I was like, I am putting my eggs in the basket of Sky Bolt.
I mean, I think everybody was, he had that, like, I don't know what the effect is or whatever, like that glow effect.
He had an aura about him. It just felt like he was going to hit a home run every time.
Oh, he's chiseled, handsome. He's got a beautiful swing. He hits from both sides of the plate and was like throwing balls 100 miles an hour in the outfield, running like a 6'5", 60.
It was sick. They were a good team. And there were a lot of good teams. And it's so funny now when I watch baseball and I see Trey Turner, right? And I'm like, I know NC State shortstop Trey Turner. You know what I mean? I know Carlos Rodon at NC State. I don't know Carlos Rodon on the Yankees. When I watch him on the Yankees, I like get flashbacks to like being at Durham Bulls Park, for the ACC tournament.
It's the same for me, man. Like when I'm watching ball, we beat Rodon actually. Threw against us on Friday night at the DBAP.
Right.
We beat Rodon. And the reason why I asked you about that series is Jack Coombs Field, 2013. Duke swept Carolina.
Oh, I mean,
that was my freshman year. That was my freshman year. But we were not supposed to. I mean, we were. Duke baseball's gone through it.
I was probably there.
You were probably there.
I probably, because I would go to like all of the close games. So I would go to Elon. I would go to Duke. The furthest I would go would be like Wake Forest. You know what I mean? So, but I would go to State.
Yeah.
Funny enough, my girlfriend at the time, her ex-boyfriend was the catcher on State. So I had to get Brett Austin. So I'd have to go to these games and like
Brett Austin was pretty good.
Really good. So
that was like catcher U for a while. They had like a string of really good catchers.
There was so much talent around. So I probably was there. I was probably like sitting in the press box trying to not show my actual feelings, trying to be a professional.
Well, that's what I'm getting to as well is do you hate me just because I went to Duke?
No. I think that's always a bridge too far. If anything, like the thing for me with Carolina and Duke, and the reason why I wanted to play it up as much as I have in my life is because one, my mom, this is who my mom is. Yeah. This is like how I was raised. You know what I mean? There was like two shades of blue is life, good and evil. It's either a Carolina person or a Duke person. Yeah. That's kind of how she put you in a box. Yeah. And so, it was kind of like bred into my brain anyway. So, you ham it up a little bit. But the funny part about it is that there's so many people like in North Carolina, like in my hometown that went to Duke, that are Iron Dukes. Like after school, the lady that I went to her house and like all of our friends was Miss K, Kimbrell's Furniture. And she was an Iron Duke and was at all the Duke games. And like when I was a kid, me and my brother would go with her to Cameron Indoor, and we wear sweatshirts with like Carolina shirts underneath it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it was one of those things where it's so close that it's fun to ham up because I think it's so special. And I think the thing that kills me now, and the worst part of what happened in 2022, which like I had a fun time kind of, poking the bear, so to speak. But the worst part about 2022 and the fact that it did get played up so much is that now people try to act like it isn't what it is. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, and now we're at the point now where I'm like arguing back the other way, where I'm like, do I have to remind you guys what this is? Yeah. Like Duke fans are reaching out to me right now. They're like, I'm so sorry about Hubert Davis. I'm like, I don't need that. You know what I mean? Like I appreciate it, but I don't need it.
No, and I know you're a good guy, right? So I know the hate in a sports rivalry is never actually going to dictate your opinions of people. But I do appreciate you playing it up because we need each other. Of
course,
we are one of the most, I would say the most, but people could argue, rivalries in sports, most relevant and fun rivalries in sports.
I would say domestically, there's no question,
right?
And if you get to the international level and you want to argue Barcelona, Real Madrid, or something, then I'm fine to have that conversation and say you can win that one. But domestically, I don't think there's anything like it.
Yeah, and it's fun. It's only fun because like you can tongue in cheek like say you guys hate each other and then get fired up for games that happen every year, and then and you end up actually making, like, now we're friends, right? Because it's like this guy
Ryan Kelly, for example. Ryan Kelly, 2022, that game happens. I'm like standing in the concourse with my family, and Ryan Kelly bumps into me, gives me a hug. It was an incredible game.
Yeah,
and it was, and I think that's the other thing from 2022 that I you and I were talking off air about this, but I've talked to people in the industry of college basketball who have been at all these Final Fours, and I'm like, what is the game? They're like, I've never felt something like that building.
Dude, that building was incredible.
It's true. Like I was like, I mean, it was a move. Like it felt like the whole world was stopped for a moment in time.
And to see, that was the first time I had been in a Final Four football stadium basketball game. I remember walking through the tunnel and just seeing the crowd and the court. Like, we had good seats, relatively good seats, so like you could see the
there
game.
There is no good seat though at these games,
right?
Unless you're on the team.
But it just like blows your mind, like how small the court looks relative to how, because at a football game, you look around, you're like, wow, there's a lot of people here, but just the big field fits kind of the stadium. When the little basketball court and all the lights are pointing at it, and there's all of these people just piled up on top of it. It just, I remember being in awe, and then it like clicks in my head. It's like, wow, Coach K is about to be done, and we have to go try and beat Carolina. This is the biggest rivalry in sports, and I get to watch it like this.
I know.
And then the game, it felt like it was 10 hours, and it felt like it was also 5 minutes.
Right.
It was just like, I was so captivated by that game. It was an amazing game. And when we lost, I was in disbelief. I was like, I feel like we should still just be playing. Like, these guys should just keep, obviously we lost, so I want to keep playing, but it just, I was like, that was the final buzzer. Wow, it really just ended. It was over.
It felt like that game on Monday, too. Like, even for, I went to the national championship game on Monday, and you're playing Kansas. And yes, Kansas and Carolina obviously have a connected history as well. Dean Smith went to Kansas, Roy coached at Kansas. There was all this connective tissue, but it did feel like whatever, it was bigger than basketball. What happened on Saturday, it was like you get to Monday and you're like, it can't even match what the intensity level. Like
Yeah.
the building intensity level should be a lot higher on the Monday national championship game, in theory, than it is on Saturday, right? And I think the other crazy part just of that Saturday game was the Kansas fans and the Villanova fans. The fact that like those four programs were in that Final Four at that time. As college basketball changes, right? That's kind of like the end of college basketball that we all grew up on. It's totally different now. You know what I mean? So like to have those four programs in a building together, like there were multiple times that weekend where like, you know, I would be out at a bar and a Villanova person, like Villanova, Carolina, they should have obviously some feelings about 2016. So to have Villanova people come up and like want to talk about, you know, the matchup, even going into the game. There was just such a connective moment there for college basketball, because no matter if you had a dog in the fight, you were just like, man, this is crazy, right? Like Carolina's going to play Duke in the Final Four in Coach K's last year. Like, how did we get here? And the whole year kind of felt like it was leading to that. You know what I mean? Like once March hit and the first game in Cameron happened, it was like Duke's going to get their get back. Carolina lost to not face them in the ACC tournament, basically dodged them. You know what I mean? I'm not going to say they lost on purpose, but a little bit of a dodging. And then like fate was like, no, they're going to see each other again. They're going to play each other. And honestly, and I said this to you and I've said it on the air multiple times, like it could have gone either which way. Like I think if Duke wins that game, Duke wins a national championship. I think Carolina winning that game, they weren't going to win the national championship. So like in the long, you know, belabored history of like the rivalry, you're like, we saved ourselves basically from Duke winning the national championship. That was the win. But that's a very loser's mentality at the same time. So I have to, you know, like I said, in this new era of Carolina Duke, I'm trying to spark the fire back.
We want to see
in a positive way.
We want to see some anger out there, you know.
And Coach K's on his radio show, and he's having a great time. And like he's going to games. There was that whole thing where like Duke fans were mad that Roy was going to games, and then Roy was getting like almost shamed for going to games. Now K's going to games. We're not shamed. We want them at the games, right? Like I want Roy and K at the games. It's good for everybody. So no shaming.
Exactly. It's interesting because like I adopted this, you know, and I feel like that is Luke and I were talking about this, where Duke, shout out to Luke on the boards. Luke is also on the baseball team at Duke, and you know, we're talking about
swept Carolina.
Swept Carolina one time. I'm probably career under 500 against Carolina, and ERA around 10, something like that.
Well, it's all right. I mean, I just want them to figure it out in Omaha. That's all I ask. One day.
We still haven't been, like, at least this, you know, maybe in the 60s or something we went, but it hasn't happened yet. It'll happen soon.
Which is crazy because, like, I mean, I watched all, like, the difference between, like, the talent, like, it's all right in the same route. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like the breaks of baseball. So
get hot and go. You know, it's a similar thing in basketball. Like March Madness happens, is it firing at the right time? Carolina and Duke, you can talk about so many of the best teams that, you know, you just have an off day in the wrong time of the year.
And then 2010 happens, and you're like, nobody thought that was going to happen.
Exactly.
And boom.
All of a sudden.
You win the national championship. The whole narrative changes.
I mean, that was 2022, though, for you guys, right? Or, 2022 was like, it was just a struggle of a year, and then all of a sudden, it's like this team is unstoppable.
Right. And unfortunately, at the time, I was very upset about this. Everybody kept coming out of the woodwork. Oh, this is Mike Davis 2.0. He did this 20 years ago at Indiana. Coach Davis, Mike Davis, Coach Davis, Hubert Davis. And I was doing my best at the time to fight the good fight for old Hubert. But it does seem at this current juncture, it could have been closer to reality. You know what I mean? But I mean, 2022 was completely off the rails. Last season, Hubert won Coach of the Year. They were a 1 seed. They lost to an Alabama team that goes to the Final Four. So I do think that the fan reaction is an overreaction. But at the same time, what Shire's doing at Duke, if you're the Carolina family or whatever, you're just like, how did they have this figured out? And that happened at the right time. Like, you know, like Kay left, but Kay left with the operation in place. And Shire's been great, you know.
I feel like this is a good segue. So I'm really nervous, and I want to get your take about the ACC as a whole, Duke, Carolina. I'm nervous because if you look at Duke and Carolina's kind of in a similar boat, the football program we're backwards from most like big state schools where football drives and basketball follows. Duke is a more extreme example where like our football team historically is really bad. Wallace Wade Stadium is not on par with the big players.
I do kind of love it though.
It's a fun place. And Manny Diaz is doing a good job. They're clearly investing in it. But I'm worried, what's the difference between Duke and Davidson is, in the 60s, Coach K shows up and changes Duke forever. Like, it's not the same place, period, academically, culturally, if Coach K doesn't come and just make this basketball program a national thing. So what happens now as college sports shift? Are they talking about leaving Duke out of whatever is to come because we don't have football? Is the basketball brand enough to get us there? Carolina has a similar thing going. I think Duke's might be a little bit more extreme. But I'm a bit worried. Do you think like that at all, or not?
Yeah,
really?
I mean, I think the ACC, the good news, the ESPN picked up, they extended that contract for 9 more years with the ACC, which was supposed to run out, I think, in 2027. So they picked up the option, which is good for the ACC. The ACC, in theory, should exist. I mean, who knows who's going to exist at this point? They floated the Super Conference 2 years ago. Yeah. That was the, let's check and see what the people think about this. Yeah. The people were like, you got to be kidding me. Yeah. They have already killed one power conference, the Pac-12. I know they're rebuilding. I know they're bringing in new teams. San Diego State, Gonzaga is going to be there. So they're going to try to get to 9 or 10, which is encouraging for the Pac-12, which means that they're going to be like G5 or G5 plus. Who even knows what these terms are? If you're the ACC, you're just like happy that you're in the Big Four. You hope that it stays a Big Four. You pray that the SEC and the Big Ten don't try to pull some sort of coup again. But I do think, from what I gather from the SEC side of things, which I don't know about the Big Ten side of things, the SEC side of things, the way that they view Carolina as a property is basically, we want the rivalry. We want Carolina Duke. So we would like to take both of them as a package deal, and we bring them, and then NC State, you go to the Big 12 or whatever it is. Wake Forest, you try to vie for the Big 10 or the Big 12 or whoever, but they take both of them. The Big 10 would probably try to do the same thing, and then you're in a place where, does South Carolina want Clemson? Does Florida want Florida State? Which we've learned they don't in the SEC. So they're not going to go to the SEC. Are they going to go to the Big 10? The Big 10's like, I don't want Florida State. Maybe I want Clemson, but not really. If they want someone, they want markets. They want Georgia Tech. They want Atlanta. They want Miami. You know what I mean? Miami's a private school that can, give them even more of a boost, especially in the NIL era. So I think that the ACC is like a property. They kind of, when the Super Conference thing got floated, they all went through their own process. And I know Carolina has like a secret committee that's, fact finding, like what would be best, going to the Big Ten, going to the SEC. So they're all doing this. They're all kicking the tires. And I think at the end of the day, when they added California, Stanford, and SMU, they saved themselves, and they probably added like 5 to 10 more years of their existence, because SMU's been a hit. SMU's going to get in the tournament too in basketball. They make the playoff. Cal and Stanford, that's just good for academics, as far as the optics of the whole brand of the ACC. So they did a good job in that sense, but it does feel like eventually Sankey and the Big Ten, they're going to look around and say, we're going to get our 30 teams. And I worry because that's going to be football related, but I do think that Duke and Carolina are sort of like Voldemort and Harry Potter, you know what I mean? 100%. They're just tethered together. 100%. They are one and the same. They need each other. It doesn't hit the same. Like Carolina, Kentucky, I like it, but I don't love it. Carolina, Duke, I love it. I need it. I want to see it.
Yeah. And it's like, back to the rivalry. If you go to the Duke, I can't speak for the Carolina athletic department, but if you go to the Duke athletic department, which I love, they do a great job. Thankful to them for a lot of things. But like, if you bring up Carolina with anything, whether now, JDS Sports, if it's business related, I still am trying to be involved in the baseball program, finding ways to help in this, shifting landscape. And if you have an idea, or you want to do a merch collection, or you want to do, maybe this agency wants to represent you, and Duke's athletic department will ask, they'll be like, is Carolina doing this? And not that that means like, oh, if you touch Carolina, you're dead to us. But it's like, they don't like each other, And like they really don't. And I think to survive, like you said, Voldemort, Harry Potter, it's like, maybe there needs to be some kind of, I'm sure there is, communication channel here for how we're strategizing together, because together both of our assets are just way higher.
Well, the encouraging part, I think, from that aspect is that Lee Roberts, the chancellor of Carolina, is a Duke grad.
Yeah.
He was the interim. They just took the interim tag off. He's basically the reason they hired Bill Belichick. I mean, he pushed that through. So he is a forward-thinking person who is there, and he is not afraid to kind of shake up the system a little bit. And I do think if there was one person that could maybe bridge that gap, someone being a Duke grad, but also running the University of North Carolina, I think that would be probably a good place to start. It does feel interesting, like just at the larger landscape of the conversation, because it does feel like there's a push in the larger narrative from the media. I don't know if it's purposeful or not to be like the rivalry is dead. It's done with Coach K, which I feel like we almost were the makers of that, and I probably should take some blame for that personally. But that to me is like also part of the issue where it's like, it is what it is. We know what it is. We're 8 miles apart. We're both high-level institutions with a lot of pride and a lot of expectations. And I think that's really Hubert Davis. The reason why he's in the situation he's in right now is because of what happened against Duke, which goes back to like how they view each other, right? I mean, in the marketplace, how they present themselves, how they sell themselves, who they work with. They're all in competition with each other, but it doesn't mean that they can work together to get both of them in a good position, which I think they can do.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up SMU as well as kind of like a shining star right now in the ACC.
And they had to beg to get in the ACC.
They had to beg. And
that's what's crazy.
And I think you can kind of trace it. Like if you look at like their success, and at least like understanding it, if you look at NIL collectives, there's a lot of public information, at least from the public schools. And SMU is not a public school, but they are
definitely not.
Kind of notoriously a well-endowed, like really good alumni group, kind of a wealthy private school.
Right.
And I bet you that, even though we don't have the information, SMU's NIL collectives or however they're paying for these teams is crushing it. And if you look at Adam Brenneman, friend of mine, he came on the show as well. He's kind of a lot like you, has a podcast show. His is college football focused.
Right.
He played at Penn State, and he posted this thing. He's like, trace NIL funding to college football wins, and it's like 1-to-1 correlation. It's crazy. Like how Indiana football is winning. How is this happening? They were like top 5 in the country in money
almost
raised.
30 million.
Yeah, and I bet you SMU, and it kind of gets to like Duke, where I'm actually kind of hopeful right now that we're doing okay on this front, because I don't know if you saw this headline. I'm sure you did. You see everything. Duke is paying. This headline blows my mind. A Tulane quarterback is getting $8 million for a year to transfer to Duke University. If you showed that to me and you when it was 2010, we'd be like, the future is weird. Like,
how did we get here?
It does tell me, though, that maybe Duke is doing well, and like it gets back to what you say with Shire in the program. Like this is probably a big part of it, is that their NIL collective is successful. They have some strategy working over there.
And you have Nike. I mean, that's Nike at the end of the day, it's nice to have Nike, and Nike understands what Duke is, which is Duke is the best brand in sports. I mean, like it really is. I mean, and the basketball is the reason why, obviously, but when you have Nike and you have that branding, and you can take Zion from Spartanburg, South Carolina, put him into this, and it's a guaranteed eyeballs, guaranteed marketing. Like, I mean, you shoot to the moon. So like they have that to sell. And as far as like being able to get a quarterback for $4 million a year. I mean, I remember when Cam Newton got $250,000 allegedly to go play at Auburn, right? Yeah. And we were all up in arms. Cam Newton's worth $250,000. This is wrong. This is insane. Yeah. And now it's like regular stuff. And I do feel like it is funny how if you're one of those people from that era and got completely taken to the woodshed and cut to 10 years later, you're like, this is ridiculous.
This is ridiculous.
Like what is happening right now?
It's ridiculous.
And it happens so fast. And like that's what I said about the kind of the end of the college basketball that we knew. There is like a before cash era and an after deals era. You know what I mean? It's like 2021, that summer when they did NIL and it passed, like that was the end. And that next season kind of is like factored into, we give it a break. But after that, it's totally different.
Totally different. So what's your, we can back off like our hyper-focused rivalry here a little bit. So let's look bigger picture. You cover all things sports, but following you, college is kind of where your heart is, it feels like.
Of course.
I think it's a good thing. These, like you said, these kids got taken to the woodshed. We need to figure out the way to do this. but it looks messy out there. What's your overview?
It's very messy. I think like when it first started, I called it the Wild Wild West. I think now we have figured out the metaphor is like we're in the open ocean and we're in Waterworld and we're Kevin Costner and we're all talking about the sand that we used to have in the past, and like, you know, there used to be land, there used to be a place that we used to point to and say it made sense. We had actual rules. The NCAA has no need to make rules, because if they make rules, they're going to get sued. They're going to lose. They're going to pay out.
Yeah.
So that's why the enforcement of the NCAA is basically like, I'm not doing anything, because every time I do anything, as much as it does get picked on and as much as it is usually wrong, it's at least something.
Yeah.
They're afraid to touch this because they know it's going to lead to, like, the Title IX of it all, right? For example, Title IX comes into the NIL situation. If you have $20 million, you're going to pay out to football. Well, the women's sports are going to be like, why aren't we getting, it should be a 50-50 rev share. So it's going to be a lawsuit. So
it's going to be a lawsuit.
The funniest part to me about college basketball this year is that Monday night, April 7th, the national championship game is going to happen. And everyone thinks that's the biggest deal in college basketball. All eyes will be on that game. But in reality, the biggest thing that's going to happen on that day is that they're going to have the settlement for the House case, and they're going to figure out what the rev share looks like and what that's going to be moving forward. And then next year, if it does pass as is expected to, and it gets divvied out as all these athletic programs are saying they're going to get Title IX suits on top of the rev share that comes out from this. So like, if you really want to look at the grand scheme of college sports, it's like, it's just litigation galore. It's just going to stay in the courts. It's going to continue to be in the courts. And the whole time that it's in the courts, it's like we live in a world with no rules, but also there are rules, but also not really. You know what I mean? It's like there's so many layers to it. And if you talk to different programs, they all have a different approach. GMs are obviously huge now. Everybody's going to have a general manager. I mean, it is semi-pro. They have to adapt to get it to semi-pro. That's why you see all these people from the pro sports being like, I can help put an infrastructure in. But it's a nightmare. And if you're one of these coaches, I feel for them in the sense that, like, how could you monitor this? You really can't. And then for the players, like, some of these deals they're signing, these NIL deals, they're some of the worst contracts, 360 deals you'll ever see. Like, rappers wouldn't even sign these deals. You know what I mean? So like, and you got kids like that are signing this stuff, and they're like going to be paying some guy in perpetuity for their whole career. So like, the whole thing just needs to get regulated, but we don't like regulations, but we got to have something. So totally.
Yeah. I mean, it's Jim Cavall, and we started talking about this before. This is, you know, he has a podcast now where it's called Now It's Legal. And he was on Adam Brenneman's show like a year ago, and his whole thing is like, remember when they made marijuana legal? And you know, they made marijuana legal, and technically you can smoke it in your house, but if you walk down the streets in New York, what do you smell? It's out in the streets. Everybody just feels like it got lifted. Like, we could just do whatever we want.
I could smoke it out in front of my storefront, and then I get arrested. I'm like, what's happening? I thought we were good.
Exactly. So like, that's his whole, you know, metaphor or whatever.
It's a great one. It's perfect.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what he's trying to do. Like you said, is we need rules. He's trying to, it's a JDS investment at Athletes.org, which would be, you know, the nonprofit union. So he's trying to establish himself as the leader there, to create a collective bargaining agreement, essentially. TBD on a lot of how that's going to go. Jim is in the day-to-day of it all, but it's always shifting. This lawsuit needs to happen. You know, the settlement needs to happen. But then it's like, okay, if you are a players union, and, you know, if you look at traditional professional sports, the union sits across from the league. Who's the league right now? Like,
is it the conferences? Is it the NCAA?
Yeah. And
is it the school?
Exactly. So now, and then there's private equity money that's trying to buy the conferences, right? So if you buy the conferences, bundle them up, there's, you know, the Super League or whatever, some form of that comes to be. So Jim is with all those people all of the time, keeping his finger on the pulse, making sure that he's out in front. The other thing that he's doing that's significant is winning the athlete support. Like, he was at the college football playoff. You know, my understanding of how a labor union comes together, one of the biggest things is the laborers kind of get to decide and like pick their leadership. There's like voting systems. It's not always the same way, but that's another big thing he's doing is going down to have like players only meetings at the college football playoff, where he's like, these are the issues. We want to hear from you. Like, we need somebody to be at the table on your behalf when these rules get written, because they need to get written. So it's a JDS Sports investment that I'm particularly pumped about, because I love college sports.
Right.
And we need leadership right now, you know?
And they have leaders that have been in the game. Like, I joke about Coach K all the time, but Coach K has said out loud multiple times, I would love to be involved in the process. I would love for someone to reach out and have a discussion with me who's actually been in the sport. And I'm sure there's a ton of coaches that are like that, like Lonnie Kruger, or a myriad of football coaches that have all stepped away from the sport. They're all willing and able to be a part of a solution. Yeah. The problem is that the organization that has been in charge of the whole operation for this time, their goal as a business is to not find the solution.
Yeah.
That is part of the issue. It's like, we're all trying to find who did this, but you did this. You know what I mean? Like that's the other part where like the honesty has to be there at some level. And I do think that everyone is now coming around to the fact that we have to have an honest conversation. And for the sake of college sports, it's basically pro sports. And if we don't want it to be pro sports, then are we going to decide there is a amateur version of this that the NCAA runs, and then there's a championship conference version of this that are for championship sports that are deemed baseball, basketball, football, whatever it is, women's gymnastics, if it's Georgia or whatever it is, and like you have money funneling into those programs, but the rest are Olympic programs. Yeah. There's got to be some sort of way to do this. We all know what the problems are. We've known for 50 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's where I like the disingenuous part of all of it is acting like it's a new problem. It's the same situation that we've had. We just have to actually do something now.
Yeah.
And nobody knows what to do.
Yeah. Now it's like in the public. It's not behind closed doors. We're not like,
we know.
We're not hiding things anymore.
We all know. And like we all knew the whole time, and that's the other part. And I'm trying to work on a project right now where it's like guys telling their recruiting stories, like their actual recruiting stories. Like, how did I end up here?
Yeah.
That's
cool.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, but the actual version. So like, tell us the real version of that story, because now you can't, because it's all changed now.
Yeah.
And if anything, people have sympathy for you making a financial decision at a time when it was acted like it wasn't the case. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So do you do a lot of stuff like that? I know, obviously, we haven't brought this up yet, but the way, we're expanding inside moves. Year one, we did a lot of, JDS portfolio company CEOs, founders type thing. We had a lot of fun, and we're like, let's do more of them, and let's expand to friends of house, partners, whatever it might be. And you did the world of 5-star with us, RTG features, which was amazing. I learned a lot about you, actually, more than just 5-star, like hearing your own personal story and your ties to it all.
Thanks.
I think most people who know you probably would think of, One Shining Podcast, that type of setting, but how about this like storytelling side of it? Do you want to do more of that? Is that like a focus?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I was with Bill Simmons when I first came out here and was at the Ringer, and I got lucky in the sense that he was starting a company, and I was, there was only 4 or 5 people there at the time, and I was the only one with a production background. So I just started editing all of these podcasts. So I would work with like different creatives, different shows, talking about pop culture, sports, whatever, with different people. And, my mom, when I was a kid, she was like, you're the boy who cried wolf. You know what I mean? Like, I love telling stories,
Yeah.
And at that time it was a bad thing, right? To be telling stories. But, as I got older, I'm just like, I love finding like the real story, especially as I talk to these athletes, right? Like when I was with Bill and I did the Bill Simmons podcast, we were with Kevin Durant when he won his first championship in 2017. We did the podcast right after, and to like be in that moment, to see someone who you talk about, getting eviscerated 24/7, like to have that moment of relief. Yeah. It wasn't even like a moment of joy, but like to see someone who's at the highest level have a moment of relief. Yeah. And like those kind of things, like as I was producing and like seeing those stories, I'm like, this isn't what really is out there as the story, but I would much rather hear that actual story. Yeah. And the more I talk to, James Michael McAdoo was a close friend of mine, and, he was on those Warriors teams, and, to kind of just hear the larger story of the locker room, like Mo Spates was so important to those teams. Yeah. But like that was never really a story, right? No one heard heard about, Mo Spates being a big leader on the Warriors, but he was. So like some of that stuff as I was like producing, I was just seeing stories and I'm like, man, I would love to actually hear that story. And then as far as like the 5-star part of it, once I knew about 5-star as a kid, but once like I kind of got into that world and you start kind of doing the Charlie on Sunny in Philadelphia, you start connecting all the dots to everybody. You're like, wow, this is a really small world, a small ecosystem. All these coaches are connected. I love those stories. Like I love figuring out how Al McGuire and Dean Smith, I knew about them from the 1977 national championship, right? Or, playing against each other and Al McGuire and Marquette winning. But like to hear the version where like Dean Smith and him were friends and they were talking strategy and that's why Al McGuire knew what he was going to do in that kind of game. You know what I mean? Like that's the story I wanted to hear. So it's kind of like the next level into like the inside baseball, you know, to use that term for some of these big time moments. So.
Is there, so I guess if you did the like recruiting project, would that be on One Shining Podcast or would it be like its own standalone thing?
This is like, in today's like content world, it used to be like we pitch, we get green light, we get budget, we make. Now it's like we pitch made product, we get paid for made. You know what I mean? It's kind of like flipped a little bit. So this project is just one of those things where Dominique Wilkins, for example, I was at the All-Star game in 2020 before the world kind of ended at that time in February. And Dominique told myself and BJ Armstrong and my other production partner, Mike Goldstein, kind of his real recruiting story. Yeah. And that was the impetus to kind of like, because he was just like, no one's ever heard this before. Yeah. We recorded it and then I started just like asking other players, like how did this actually happen? It's a very taboo subject, but I have been able to get people to kind of break the wall because I've explained that era's over, So like now people are a lot more willing to talk.
Yeah, they're willing to talk. And like Johnny Manziel is like kind of, he's out there doing this, a lot of this right now. I think it's very interesting. And I think it's fun to kind of compare back and forth. And the conversation should be had because guys like Reggie Bush or, lost everything.
Well, we can be honest about it too. It's like, what is the reality of the situation? Like, what do you have to do to get a player's attention that is that high profile of a recruit? You have to address the economics of the situation. Yeah. And if you talk to anybody, any coach at any level, like they all know that. Everybody knows that. We just don't want to talk about it. Yeah. So it's like, that's just what it is.
Yeah. So for something like that versus, you're on The Ringer,
right.
I want to learn from you because obviously I'm trying to do this podcast thing. I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Right.
It's like more of a challenge than I thought it would be. I mean, most of our guests are great. They're pretty easy to talk to. But I can see it in myself. It's like, I could have done this better. Could have steered the conversation better, asked better questions, whatever it might be. How about for you, if you're going to do something that's, how do you prep and how does it change, I guess, based on what the goal is? Like if you're going in more interview like where you want this athlete to tell a story versus you're on Through the Ringer and it's like the Super Bowl's coming up, we're talking about gambling.
Yeah, it's like it's different hats, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of like how I feel like I have like a producer brain and then like I can wear a host hat and I almost like disassociate a little bit, you know what I mean? Like there is I've been able to kind of have like a persona, like a One Shining Podcast I would say is more of like a heightened version of who I am, right? Like it's more of a persona based, it's more reactionary, whatever. And then like a host version is more like a muted version of myself, which is, it's all very strange, right? Like when you just think about like, you're kind of like playing a version of yourself, but it is an interesting thing. In today's media climate, it's kind of what everybody's doing. Like I watch someone like a Theo Vaughn, right? It's like, he's playing a character of Theo Vaughn, right? I watched Caleb Presley, who I went to school with, one of my friends, like Caleb I know personally, and then I watched Caleb the character, you know what I mean? And it's like, those are two different
I would say the same thing about Grayson Allen.
Right.
He's a good guy.
Yeah,
he's a really good guy.
Honestly, Grayson was really nice. Like I met Grayson at the Summer League 2018, 2019. He was at a table with Luke Kennard and I was with Chris Vernon who works at the Ringer, and Chris Vernon's like, there's your guy right there. He goes over to Luke Kennard, because he was on the Grizzlies at the time. And he's like, Luke, here's your number one hater right here. And they were both very nice. And, Grayson, I was like, Grayson, you didn't mean to trip anyone, did you? And he was like, no. And I was like, great. All right, we got that solved.
We got the video evidence, so it doesn't look good. I love Grayson. It doesn't look good, though. It doesn't look good.
It's okay. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. But, it's just, it's just it's all very like fascinating. I don't even remember what we were talking about before that.
Just like I guess
I saw the Grayson Allen tripping someone, and I lost my mind. Yeah,
I guess how you prep and get ready for these things.
Okay, yes, right. Yeah. So like they're all the personas, right, are different. So like for the FanDuel stuff, I mean, that's all just gathering lines, figuring out where, stuff. That's with Cousin Sal. So that's like a totally different thing. As far as like the One Shine Podcast interviews, like I have Kyle Smith, Stanford head coach. He's on the show tomorrow. And like for someone like Kyle Smith, like I just watched a bunch of interviews from him when he was at Columbia.
Yeah.
So that was from like 2013. And it was funny, like on his staff, like he had Todd Golden on his staff, who's the Florida head coach right now. Yeah. So like that sort of stuff, like I wanted to have a conversation with Kyle Smith about like that genesis of nerd ball, which is what they call it now, right? And now like kind of the branches of that group where they're all over college basketball right now. So like the prep for like an interview is a little bit different. I feel like that's more of like the journalistic, J school brain, where it's like watching older interviews, doing research, digging up questions that like I've seen him or that person be asked in the past that maybe they dodged, or maybe it's a different answer than it was before. Like in that interview I found with Kyle Smith, they asked him his dream job and he said Stanford. Mm-hmm. And now he's the head coach at Stanford.
That's really cool.
So it's like 12 years ago you're saying like that could be your dream job, and you liked all these old Stanford teams, and now you're the head coach at Stanford. So it's like digging up some of the research. And then as far as like the commentary, which is like more of the persona, like that's more of a headline reactionary, just kind of get the scuttlebutt of what's going on, let people know what's going on, try to have some fun with it, try to, you have two options, inform, entertain. And I feel like as long as you're checking one of those boxes, you're good. Like even if it's boring and I'm telling you things that are happening, at least you're being informed. Even if I'm saying something that's stupid and you're like, what an idiot, and I'm laughing at him, at least you're being entertained. You know what I mean? So as long as I think you're hitting one of those two, you're in the right spot.
Do you get nervous before you go on camera and do things?
I think so. I mean, when I was younger, I think I was naive and just kind of like, and I was doing it at school anyway, and I was just like, I'm fine to have some fun with this. I think with the internet that we live in now, you get so much feedback, and
it's crazy.
You start questioning your own like sanity, and you start thinking if you're an idiot sometimes. So like, I've at least gotten past like that first wall of pushback, and now I'm like more secure in doing things like that. Everyone has like their own version of imposter syndrome, and I was so young when I started that I would question my own, like even stuff that I knew to be true. Like I would question it. Like if someone commented back, like that didn't happen, I'd be like, did it not happen? You know what I mean? And then you start going back, you're like, yes, it did. It did happen. You know what I mean? So in that sense, like I think it's good to feel a little bit of nervous though. I think it would be bad if you didn't feel a little bit of juice or a little bit of anxiety, because it shows that you care.
Yeah, it makes it also fun. Like it's like the closest thing I get to taking the mound nowadays. There's a start time. People will see this. Like it might only be a few hundred of them at like a Duke home game, but I got to be ready. I got to do it right, and I care about it. Like you said, like if you don't get nervous, that's probably a bad sign.
If you don't get nervous, that kind of says you're in the wrong spot. Like there's things I've done. Like I didn't get nervous transcribing press conferences. Trust me. And I think that's why it helped my career, because they're like, this guy does not want to be here. But
that's you get good. It done. I mean, I like that though. Super cliche, but that was one of our Duke baseball things, was like chop wood, carry water. You got to do the small jobs to earn the big ones. So
Bill Self, load the wagons.
You know
what I mean? That's all it is. It's like, it's a process too. And I think my thing that I see now when I talk to younger people, just coming out of Carolina, I'll have kids call me and try to want to get in the media space, is like, the perception versus the reality is very far off. And I think that's part of the issue too, where it's like, coming out of school, people now are like, I'm hoping to get six figures. It's just like, that's not what it is.
It's not what it is.
Unfortunately. And like, you got to kind of work it. And that was the best advice I got in school, was just like, learn how to do everything. So like, I knew how to run an audio board. I knew how to run a camera, because like I was working on the TV show. I would direct some days, produce some days, it's just like, do whatever. Run the teleprompter, just do whatever, because then you have value.
Did you have fun in all the different jobs? Like, of course, doing the
transcribing is the only thing I didn't have fun doing. But sometimes, like, I would be transcribing like Rick Pitino after a Louisville Carolina basketball game. I was watching the Dean Dome, and there would be some nugget in there that would be like a universal truth that I would just like put in my notes.
Yeah.
And like I have like this notes of all these like basketball mantras of like, because these coaches, they do the cliche coach speech, but like sometimes you can't cover it up so much, like something slips out.
Yeah.
So like in the transcribing, even though it was miserable, like there would be sometimes where like Roy Williams or Rick Pitino or Coach K, Brad Brownell, like one of these guys like would slip some sort of universal truth about basketball that I'd be like, oh, wow. Yeah, big guards. Like if you have a big guard, you have an advantage in every, you know what I mean? And then, whatever it is. And so like, even if I was miserable, like there would be some sort of like utility you could find in it.
Dude, yeah, that is like, the coaches are cool people, honestly. Like if you're a successful coach, that is like, it's very impressive to me. It's one of the coolest things. Looking back on my time with JDS Sports, first started as an intern, had like various random jobs. It was PRC. And
Shout
Matt
out.
and Joe, PRC's the best. So that was one of the best parts about my job was just being close to a guy like that and learning.
Right.
But they had me doing all different kinds of things in the beginning because we were just standing the thing up. All these different new tasks are coming in the door, and it was a great opportunity for me to just be like, let me give you my hands to do whatever.
Right.
And one of the cool things I got to do was, we'll plug World of Five Star again. We were sitting on the archives of one of the coolest things about 5-Star Basketball Camp, as you know, is they recorded all of those coaches' lectures.
Right.
So, you got Hubie Brown, you got Coach K, you got Rick Pitino, you got everybody. Everybody.
You think of a name, they got it.
They got it.
That was the fun part of it. I was like, Jesus Christ. Like, this is everybody.
Yeah. And like, they literally were like, we have all of this footage. We've listened to some of it. We want to know like how good it really is. You need to spend some time every day listening to a lecture, finding good stuff, seeing if we could do maybe a podcast, maybe some kind of creation with this. And like it was a chop wood carry water moment to a degree, but like it also wasn't. It was amazing. Like I'm listening to Rick Pitino in this like unheard of conversation,
right?
Lecturing a camp of kids in whatever year it was. I don't even know. And he tells a story of when he's on his honeymoon and Jim Boeheim wants him to come coach at Syracuse with him.
Right.
And like, I showed it to PRC and we were sitting in there like, this is gold. This is amazing. It ended up being, like one of the I guess, selling trailer type things that we used to go make the world of 5-Star and get people involved. But yeah, no, I thought that was cool. Like to hear like Rick Pitino, you get to hear him in this unheard setting, and those are some of the people I look up to most is like leaders of young men.
Leaders when they're like in their like incubancy, right? They're like they are in their like very young infant phase of their lives, and they're not sure of things, and like you're right, like listen to that stuff, and then like interviewing like Calipari and Pitino and all these guys, and like referencing those stories back to them, and them having those moments of like, oh yeah, that's right. Like at Rick Pitino, for example, there was one of the tapes where he was talking about he had like a scuff up with Pete Carril, the coach of Princeton, and we asked him, he's like, oh yeah, that's right, me and Pete Carril got in a fight after lunch. He's just like, what? Pete Carril and Rick Pitino are just like on the playground like playing pickup and then fighting each other? Yes, that's awesome. I want to hear that story.
I believe it, dude. So the Duke baseball locker room was in Cameron Indoor, and it was directly adjacent to the visitors basketball locker room. So we would sit in our locker room, watch a game on our TV, halftime would come, we would all be as quiet as possible. We'd go to the wall and we could hear the halftime speeches. And I'll never forget Pitino he was at Louisville at the time, laying into his team. It was so cool to listen to. It was
well, cool. That was great because we were in like kind of the last like great stage of the ACC coaches. You know what I mean? Like our kind of run. Rick Pitino wearing a white suit, coming to coach at Cameron or coach in the Dean Dome. You're like, this is next level stuff. You know what I mean? Like, and I at the time, now that I am where I am watching all these college basketball games, I have to pinch myself sometimes to be like, oh yeah, that's right. We were just there. Like, I went to so many Coach K, press conferences. Like, I had to go do his like radio show. Like, when I was with David, I'm just a nobody in the back of the room, which, and then doing the 5-star thing, interviewing Coach K, you know what I mean? Like, he's super cool. But again, like, he has the persona, then there's the person, and he understands it. And all those guys do. If you really get it down, as long as it's not personal, they're just like, I get it. It is what it is.
No, I seen the screenshot of you and Coach K. You're both smiling very much.
He said, "I heard you do an impression of me," and I said, "That's a lie." You've been led astray.
Yeah, that's cool. How about working for Bill? It seems like you are clearly obsessed with what you do, extremely talented, and have earned your way to the top. It feels like Bill was a great connection for you and something that really helped your career get to where it was supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was an intern at Fox Sports my junior going into my senior year. So I came to LA for the first time in 2014, and FS1 launched that summer. So I was here for the launch of FS1. Jay Onright, Dan O'Toole, they had like their podcast. So I would like go in and sit with their podcast and just kind of like, so that was my summer that I spent out here. I got like studio experience. I got some digital experience and podcast experience. Went back to my senior year, applied for all these jobs. You know how it is. You hear nothing. Yeah. Every one of my friends is like in the business school or, whatever else. They're like, I got my job. I'm making this. I'm doing this. I'm going there. I'm like, this is not good. You know what I mean? And Fox Sports is like, we're not sure. We have something for you. We'll be in touch. So I'm like getting my spring semester. Like, as every kid is their senior year in college, I'm like kind of freaking out. I got offered and I applied for Grantland, which was Bill's, website at ESPN. I applied for an editorial internship. Which is not a job, it's an internship, but at least like I was like, I'll go there, I'll work hard, I'll get caught, whatever they want me to do, I'll do whatever. And I have a sense of urgency. I had just been on the West Coast in the summer. That's one thing I learned coming from the East Coast. I'm like, wow, these people do not have a sense of urgency, which is, it works in your favor. You come from the East Coast, you're like, if I'm willing to have a sense of urgency, I can do anything. So when I came out for Grantland, I was driving across the country. I was in El Paso, Texas. I've told this story before. I was in a Blockbuster with my girlfriend at the time. I get a phone call from Mallory Rubin, who now works at The Ringer, but at the time she was at Grantland. She's who hired me. She's like, hey, I know you saw the news. You still have your internship. Don't stress about it. I had not seen the news. I was like, what is happening? Get on Twitter. Bill had said what he said about Roger Goodell. He got fired. So on my way out to LA after I graduated, I was like, holy, you know what? I'm not going to have a job very soon. Who even knows if Grantland exists? Still went out there, almost turned around and went back home, but still went out. And so I worked at Grantland for the final 6 months of Grantland. I did editorial stuff, wrote some stories, but then production-wise, they needed people to help with the video podcast, cutting cameras. So I would TD, I would direct, I would cut, clips, I would do the audio afterwards and post it as the podcast. And David Jacoby was just like, you're under my wing, you learn, So I'm just learning production stuff. But on Fridays, I would have to go to Bill's house and take him. He couldn't go to ESPN, so I had to take him stuff on Fridays. So on every Friday, I would go and take him different stuff. One of the last Fridays, it was like his birthday, funny enough. It was like his 46th birthday. This is 2016 or 2015. I went and dropped off a bunch of this stuff, and then he told me he was going to start a podcast. This was on Friday. There was like an audio board and everything in the back. I kind of just like plugged in some stuff, set it up for him. He gave me his book. Wrote a nice little note, was like, hopefully we cross paths again, right? That was a Friday. Sunday, he called me and was like, I heard you know how to do this stuff. Could you do it for me for 2 weeks? I'll give you a trial period. If you do a good job, maybe I'll hire you. So I did Bill, as an anonymous person for 2 weeks in the morning. I did Jalen and Jacoby, the radio show at night. Neither knew what was going on at the time. And then after 2 weeks, Bill was like, put in your 2 weeks at ESPN. You're going to come work for me. You're going to be the producer of my podcast. And then, that was amazing. Kind of like the rest from there. But then the story got kind of shifted over time. Like now people think I was a poster boy, like I worked at UPS or something. And Bill was like, I see something in that kid, But no, I was already working at Grantland, and I was like already kind of like, he knew me through David Jacoby. And, but yeah, then I was just getting paid out of Bill's wallet every once in a while, editing podcasts, like bootstrap operation. He was launching The Ringer. HBO was involved. I was supposed to work for his TV show originally. I had too many podcasts. He was like, just stay over there. And then ended up, I think the title they gave me at first was like founding producer or something like something that it sounded good. You know what I mean? Good. But didn't really matter. And so then ended up editing a ton of shows and launching a bunch of podcasts with them. And, did that for 4 years, left after 4 years, and then did, kind of the licensing of my own show for 3 years. And then Titus, my old co-host, wanted to go to Barstool, so then he went to Barstool, and then Bill was like, the door is open to come back. I'll give you One Shine podcast, and it's kind of weird. It's like now I'm back in the same place I started.
Yeah. How did the shift like from producing to like hosting happen?
Well, I mean, I went to school to be a broadcaster, so like that's kind of what I wanted to do. But like I said, I did not expect to get there and Bill be like, "Man, this guy is ready to go. Let's get him polished." So like being able to have utility as like a production person, I think just opened more doors. And then on these other shows like The Watch with like Chris Ryan and Andy Greenwald, like I had a microphone, so like it was kind of like a little baby deer early on. Like they'll throw it to me. They're like, "Tate, you know who Michael Caine is, right?" And I'm like, "Oh, I love Michael Caine. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, And then, that's all I said that day. But then you get a little bit more comfortable. And then over time, you kind of build it up. So,
yeah. So you must love Bill.
I do. I mean, I think Bill is like, he's like a genius in his own very special Bill way. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's fair to call people geniuses, but I think that what I've learned just being around Bill and observing Bill is like, one, he likes to curate creatives, and two, he always like has like a big, kind of like bird's eye view of what's going on, you know what I mean? Which I think is a very special skill, and it's hard to have that. And he's able to kind of like float up there, exist up there, and and kind of divvy up accordingly. So it's good.
Yeah, I love Bill. I mean, I think he's, and it's similar to you. It's like, I think about him basketball. I think about him Boston Red Sox baseball. I think about him in all different places. He's just like omnipresent in sports, and he's always on the ball. And sports is like a I think it's maybe the dominant, but it's one of the most dominant things in culture, right? So like you have to also get people to be able to like really get sports. And I would say Bill is one of those people where I'm like, it makes sense. Like he's crushing it for that reason.
He gets it. Yeah.
He's common man. He
is the common man, the common fan, but he also like is not one of those people that is a know-it-all, which I do think there is a very fine line. And I do think a lot of people ask me, like, why is there such a repulsion to NBA right now? And I do think a lot of it is like, and baseball has this a little bit too, where it's like everyone that covers it is so much smarter than you, quote unquote, that you can't even like have an intro into the conversation. Yeah. Like I can't even ask a question, without someone being like, "Are you an idiot?" Like that, that's how the NBA or the MLB and even college basketball sometimes, like that's kind of how the media has, become a little bit where it's like almost antagonistic to the common fan. And it's like, that's not the point. What are we doing here?
Right. Right.
That's not it.
Yeah. The NBA is in a weird spot. I grew up basketball. I played baseball at the higher level, but I loved basketball. Grew up on like the early 2000s Nets. Like those dudes were dominant. They made me fall in love with
Richard Jefferson,
Kerry
Kittles.
Yeah, man. Great hoopers. But I do agree that the NBA is in a weird spot. And it's not, that's not a opinion of my own. That's like LeBron's talking about, like, are we shooting too many threes? And people were talking about viewership. Should the season change? Like, what would you do if you were Adam Silver, I guess? And then, maybe that's an unfair question to ask somebody, but
well, I appreciate the Adam Silver, and I will say, I mean, he gets a hard time from a lot of people. I do think Adam Silver is like always trying to figure it out, which I think
I like him a lot.
Right, there is an earnestness in the fact that like he is trying to figure it out. Like I don't think that he's one of those people that's putting on an act of like, let me go figure this out, but he's doing nothing. Like he legitimately is. I liked what he said about trying to change the game to match the FIBA model. I think there has to be some sort of uniformity, and that goes down to college basketball too. I've been saying this in college basketball, and Silver said this. He was like, we need a game that's 40 minutes, 4 quarters. If I'm college basketball, I hear the NBA say that. we're almost about to be a pro operation, basically about to be the ABA to the NBA. We're almost going to be in competition at some point, like in 15 to 20 years. That's where it's trending at this point with these games and how it's all set up. So like if I'm Silver or if I'm college basketball, I'm like, let's change to quarters. Let's go to the game that the NBA wants to play, and we basically do like what they do with the G League, where they test stuff out, and what the NCAA does with the NIT, test stuff out. Do that in college basketball. Find a way to like become business partners in some way. Yeah. And then the connective tissue is built in, and maybe like the two-way contract, like think about this in a future world. What if a two-way contract is like the Jazz have two-way deals with Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas?
That would be so interesting.
And you have two-way players that play on those teams, and then they come up and they play on the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that could happen in a world. Like there is a world now that everything is Play-Doh. Yeah. Like there is a world to create a perfect version of what a basketball league looks like. Yeah. And the reason why I think at the NBA I would be stressed is like you got Mav Carter and these guys being like, we're going to go make a league. You know what I mean? That's how much of Play-Doh it is right now. Yeah. And that they're like, shit, we can just make our own league. And the NBA is like, well, we run 5 different leagues already. We got the WNBA, we got the gaming league, all this other stuff. So that they're like all over the place. So it's very open-ended. But if I were Adam Silver and the powers that be at the NCAA, like, maybe working, like goes back to killing. Maybe sometimes working together can be good. Who would have thought?
Yeah, Slam. I mean, we were talking about this off camera. Slam has historically been just NBA focused. Not that they were avoiding college basketball on purpose, but I think the audiences were just a little bit different. The average college fan and the average NBA fan. Obvious overlap, but also obvious difference. And that's something that they've recently. It's a market they've gone into hard, and they're having a lot of success in. I would be good for Slam, if those ties between college basketball and the NBA keep getting closer.
They are. It should be close. Like, and if you're, I know you asked about the NBA of it all, but like the college version of this is so simple to me. It's like, let's get a uniform basketball first and foremost. Every single conference, we all use the same basketball, and when we get to the NCAA tournament, we use that same basketball. I'm so tired of like I get to the tournament every year, and you got teams complaining that the ball's different. Also, like let's start there.
You ever see Bobby Perez? This is my friend's younger brother. He played at Wofford University.
Shout out.
Shout out to Carolinas. He
smallest campus ever. It's literally one street.
It's a beautiful place.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Right? Yeah. You just drive. It's like a little semicircle of like a driveway. And you just go out and you're like, "There's Wofford."
There it is. He was a good shooter, and he like went viral. He's been going viral for big college basketball games that get hosted on neutral events or neutral locations because he just like zeroes in on the ball, and he's like, "This ball was pumped up not by somebody that works for the team. This is pumped up by somebody that does have no interest in the game. There's too much air in this ball."
Right.
and then he's like, "You got to go bet the under." And then he crushes. He crushes. You got to look him up. Bobby P for 3.
That's I gotta. This guy sounds like my hero. It needs to happen because I was there at the regional last year in Los Angeles, and I was watching pregame. Like, because in the NBA they have 3 balls, right? There's 3 game balls. You pick the main game ball. God forbid something happens or whatever. Like they have another second one. They basically rank the 3 balls, and usually the captains pick. Like it could be something simple as that in college basketball, and I think that would immediately make the game better. Yeah. Because when you watch the tournament, especially with this Wilson ball, like the orange, like the super orange bright ball they have now. It does look overinflated and it does bounce weird. And I bought one just to see it, and it does. Like it feels plasticky.
Yeah, I mean, you hooped, you get it. When something's bouncing too hard, it's harder to shoot, and like if you're just not in control of it. You want that ball to be
feels
exactly
like a recess basketball. You know what I mean? Like that's what it feels like. You're in 4th grade, and they're like, these are the Baden basketballs that we've had here for 40 years. Yeah, that's what it feels like.
Yeah, I think it matters.
And I love Wilson. I love Wilson basketballs. I think the Wilson evolution is the solution. Yeah. Like that is a simple, anyone that's ever gone to a court in their life indoor and sees a rack of Wilson evolutions has always been like, okay, that's nice. Yeah. Like we've seen a lot, like you see The Rock, you see, like, you know what I mean? You see some of these other basketballs, you're like, I am not happy about this. Nike has terrible basketballs. Like Carolina plays with Nike basketballs. They're soft, they're squishy, like they're easy to palm and dunk and everything, but shooting, it's not the same.
Oh, the Wilson evolution, dude. I think it's got a very special place in my heart.
It's number one. They should play it at the NBA level too. Yeah. And they just switched over to Wilson. So I don't understand it. Everybody feels that way too. Like you talk to anybody that's ever shot a basketball, they're like, that's my favorite ball.
100%. Yeah, JJ Redick's been going off on the balls. That interview was funny. But
is it encouraged? Like, are Duke fans happy that JJ is the coach of the Lakers?
That's a good question.
I feel like deep down, Coach K is jealous.
I don't know.
I would be.
Yeah, I don't know.
K deserved it. They should have hired K.
You think he would have done that
right now?
You really think so?
No. But I like the idea of it. I like that they should have called K first and then told JJ, like, K said no.
K said no.
That's why you're in.
There should have been a formality of it
yes,
all.
We had to ask K. Just the ring. I like it.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think the Lakers situation is really interesting. I think LeBron and JJ work well together. I'm a JJ stan. Like when I was a kid, like I said earlier, like I kind of adopted the rivalry. Right. I just liked the rivalry. Like my side in the rivalry, I adopted. I just thought it was sick,
Yeah, right.
And when JJ was there, I was rooting for JJ. When it was Tyler Hansborough's time, it's like Tyler's the coolest guy in the world. Right. That's how I grew up. And JJ will always be like one of those, the same way the Nets in my head, it's like early 2000s Nets. It's like JJ Redick, one of the reasons why I fell in love with the game. So I'm rooting for him. And I think that like they have a chance. I think
he's doing a great job.
Yeah, they have a chance to like kind of like LeBron's time in LA has obviously not been the best part of his career. I know he doesn't want to go out on this. And I think, him and JJ and now Luka, which is crazy in itself. That whole thing is nuts.
That was the finesse of the century. Them being able to, Pelinka and JJ Redick, like them being able to, because regardless, like everybody knows when you sign up to work with LeBron, like Anthony Davis just saw, like he's going to outlast me, right? Yeah. But they made the one move you can make to outlast LeBron. Yeah. Like now JJ and Pelinka are going to outlast LeBron, which is wild.
Fascinating.
I did not think that was going to happen. But JJ, I mean, kudos to JJ because he had his podcast at the Ringer. I used to edit his podcast.
Oh, really?
JJ was always very nice. I didn't deal with him face to face very much. He was in New York. Tommy Alter was who he dealt with, but Tommy obviously went off with JJ and started their production company. And Tommy is, just like the greatest connector in the world. He's like one of those guys, like you meet someone, he's like, you need to meet this person, connect some kind of thing. So, I joke with JJ. Obviously, JJ was the bane of my childhood a little bit, but at the same time, like he's from Roanoke, Virginia. I used to play freaking soccer tournaments up in Roanoke. One of my best friends moved from Roanoke to my hometown and knew his fan. You know what I mean? So it's like one of those things where it's like, if anything, it's more respect because you're like, this guy's incredible. Him and Adam Morrison that year in 2006, that's like peak college basketball.
Peak college basketball, man. Adam Morrison is so cool. Like I love the weirdos,
And
like,
he calls all the Gonzaga games. Adam Morrison is calling every Gonzaga game.
Yeah,
for the radio, which is crazy.
I think they're doing that. They're doing some kind of special on him where they're like recapping his career and like he's like going to talk to a camera quite a bit.
I feel like next year that tournament will be like a 20-year look back to Adam Morrison, the UCLA game, JJ Redick, and that. Like that's going to be. Next year will be the big year where we get the full look back at those two guys.
I hope so. And I hope JJ's got like some playoff wins to bring to all of that.
I think JJ is going to be doing it for a long time if he wants to. And I feel like he just set himself up being in LA. I mean, it's a big win. And having Luka, and Luka was his teammate. Luka doesn't do podcasts. You know what I mean? Luka doesn't talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And the fact that he did that for JJ, like he has a lot of respect for him. And JJ, like you would think in an archetype he would be hated by these guys, but he's not. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Like they all get it. They all like him. He knows Arn. Tell him Arn is like a god. You know what I mean? Like he's in the right family tree to like make it all work.
Yeah. And I love when. Because, like, the first question you asked, like, why is Jason Kidd coaching? Why is JJ Redick coaching? They have so much money. They gave so much time to this game. Like, aren't they bored of it? And I just love the fact that, like, they actually love it that much. They've been doing this for 40, 50 years. And it's a grind, man. Like, it's like anything else. You got to go to work, and you got to get obsessed, lose yourself in it, and it gets tiring. And the fact that they still want to do it, guys like that, like, I love that.
Especially for JJ to be in the posh spot that he was in,
Exactly.
Like I get to just talk about all these people.
Exactly.
I get to just show up and record for an hour and a half and go about my business and be with my kids and coach my kids and be with my wife. Like he gave up a lot, and then he moves out to LA and his house that he's living in burns down.
Yeah, crazy.
I mean, I feel for him in that sense. I saw the other day before All-Star break and I watched his press conference after that game the other night and he was just like, we're living in a hotel. I'm trying to find an apartment. Like this stuff is so small compared to like what my life is right now that I mean, you know, you feel for him that this is his first year, but like
Crazy.
I think Luke, like in 5 years, he's going to be like, this is awesome. You know what I mean? But right now it's hard to get your arms around that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I could talk to you about sports and hoops all day. What else are you working on? You hinted at the recruiting storytelling.
Yeah.
Anything else that anybody listening should be waiting for? You're ready to tease? Maybe it's just an episode that's coming out next week.
Yeah, I mean, you know, March Madness is coming up, so One Shining Podcast. That's the podcast. Very excited about that. We're gonna be in Las Vegas. Myself, cousin Sal, Kyle, my producer, who is the producer of Ryan Rosillo and Bill Simmons podcast as well. He will be in Vegas for the first round, so we'll be out there. That'll be fun. We'll be at Jimmy Kimmel's Comedy Club. So if you just want to watch basketball, and we got Race to 10. Sal pays $10 out for people that make bets for first to 10 in each game. So that'll be good. And then, we'll be at the Final Four, San Antonio, which will be a good time. And, next week we got Chris Jenkins on Monday, which will be good. Chris Jenkins, friend of the program. He is someone that caused me quite a bit of pain once upon a time, but we have become friends, which, you know, goes to the growth of things in life. And so he'll be great. And then I got Kyle Smith, the Stanford head coach, coming on Friday's show.
Oh, nice.
So there you go.
Very cool.
Yeah, got some good guests. Like, this is the time of the year, like Super Bowl ends, then everybody wants to like talk college basketball. So this is my sweet spot. I get like a month like of swoon.
This
That's
is my
all
favorite.
I need.
I love the NFL, but I love college basketball more. I think it's
the best.
It's the best.
It really is. Like, and the tournament is so good, and I hope they don't, mess around with the tournament. That's the one thing the NCAA has ever done right. And they did it at the highest level. Yeah, they did it at the highest level. So you have to give them a little bit of respect. Like nowadays, everyone's just like full hate.
Yeah.
I'm like, the way to be an actual hater is like to give 10% of respect, and then you can do the rest.
Then you can do the rest.
That's the whole.
It's
that's
like
the scale.
Persuasive arguing.
Yeah, right. You got to figure out your percentages. You know what I mean? That's all it is.
All right, cool. Well, dude, this was a ton of fun. Thank you so much.
Of course, man.
For coming in.
Anytime you need me, and if Carolina and Duke need us to get on the phone to
That's maybe what we need to
bring
do.
us together, we can do it.
We can be the arbiters. Yeah.
There you go, man. Appreciate you.